back to our series on Plato's Republic. In this episode, we are going to move into Book 2 of Plato's Republic, and we will discuss the great challenge of why justice is valuable through the lens of Glaucon and his brother Adeimantus. In this discussion, what we find is these two brothers, Glaucon and Adeimantus, trying to separate or distinguish in an extrinsic manner the reality of justice, or the intrinsic nature of justice, from its extrinsic consequences. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, don't give a praise of justice for what it can do extrinsically, but praise it or evaluate it, show us the value of justice intrinsically. And we've already seen this through the conversation that Socrates has with Thrasymachus in the first book. But in this book, it actually that discussion gets amped up. They sort of double down on the arguments that Thrasymachus makes. Not so much because they themselves buy those arguments, but because they don't think that Socrates quite lived up to what he said he would do, namely the valuation of justice over injustice. They think is something that has been insufficiently established, and so they're wanting to kind of push back against Socrates, who they are actually rooting for. I mean, this is what's important to keep in mind. Going back to what we talked about in the very first episode of this series, that a philosophical conversation isn't so much about who wins, who can overpower whom with arguments and words, so that your opponent, so to speak, is forced to back down and to consent to whatever you have to say. That's not a philosophical argument. That's a sophistical argument. Rather, what they're wanting to do is they're wanting to pose questions to Socrates, and they're hoping that Socrates can show them the light, namely show them how to work through these perplexities or these conundrums. Because as you see on page 37 of the Reeves translation of the Republic, or 358 C5, you see Glaucon saying, I am perplexed indeed, and my ears are deafened listening to Thrasymachus and countless others. So Glaucon admits to his own perplexity when he listens to all these sophists speaking, people who are praising injustice over justice. He finds it somewhat persuasive, and he wants to see justice praised. Well, he wants to see it done in give it its own justice, you might say, do justice to justice. And so he's sort of hoping that Socrates can do this, but the only way that could ever happen is if Glaucon makes the strongest case that he can. One of the great fallacies of informal logic, or just logical argumentation, is called a straw man, where you raise a position in a very weak way, likely a very deliberately weak way, so that you can tear it down. So you try to make your opponent's view seem childish or naive, or you sort of oversimplify it so that it's easy for you to refute. But Glaucon doesn't want anything to do with that. He doesn't want to straw man any of these arguments. He rather wants to present the best argument possible and see what Socrates can do with that. And that would be what would persuade him, because they're looking, after all, for the truth and not just to be convinced, right? So this is something that we kind of all know deep down. There's a difference between just being convinced by something and then stopping it to question, well, why am I convinced by this? And that's the thing that is happening here in Book 2. They're addressing or re-examining Thrasymachus, but this time through the lens of a philosophical conversation, which is why the whole book, go to the very beginning of Book 2, the very beginning of this book, you have Socrates asserting, when I had said this, right? He finishes Book 1. When I had said this, I thought I had done with the discussion. So Socrates thinks, okay, the discussion's over. I've said everything I need to say. But then here's what's interesting, and once again, this is the drama, I think, revealing the thesis. He goes on, but it all turned out to be only a prelude, as it were. You see, Glaucon, who was always very courageous in everything, refused on this occasion too to accept Thrasymachus's capitulation. Instead, he said, "Do you want to seem to persuade us, Socrates, that it is better in every way to be just rather than unjust, or do you want to really persuade us of this?" So what you have is you have Socrates reflecting or admitting that he gave his case and he thought he was done, but what Glaucon wanted was to have a recapitulation, a redo of those arguments, but this time with a different context. He wants it done in a philosophical context. So he almost wants to start over, right? So Book 2 is almost to start over. And so there's going to be a lot of repetition in the concepts, a lot of the words, the themes that occurred in Book 1. Those are going to also be occurring in Book 2, but in kind of a new way. And so you have to be a little bit patient with this maneuver. It serves a purpose. It serves a philosophical purpose, also a dramatic purpose. But it is indicative of what we had mentioned in the first episode, that what's happening is there's a type of recollection or a repetition happening here. So not only is Socrates telling of the whole republic a recollection, but what you get is another recapitulation or a recapping of that conversation in Book 2 that had happened earlier in Book 1. Okay, and so it's all framed here right up front with the distinction between seeming to persuade and really persuading. So the theme, the thematic of Book 2, you might say, is the distinction between appearance and reality, the seeming and the being. And this also gets espoused or gets presented within the context of the intrinsic and the extrinsic, right? Because what this happens is the distinction between seeming to persuade and really persuading gets spelled out in almost the very next sentence. Right? It's just about 2 lines down, where Socrates says, "No, I really want to persuade you. I don't want to just seem to persuade you, but I want it to really be the case that you're persuaded. I don't want you to believe me because I've fooled you or duped you, or we both missed something important that should have been brought up," right? That happens a lot of times. 2 people can be arguing, they come to an agreement, but they could still be in error because both parties could have missed something important. So you kind of, even though you're in agreement, you kind of want to slow down and maybe step back and return to the beginning and work through it together to see if we both have missed something. Okay, so then what happens is Glaucon says, right, in order to really persuade us, here's what we need to think about, right? So Glaucon makes a distinction between 3 different kinds of good, right? Something can be good in 3 different ways. And this is, drawing out this distinction of the 3 different kinds of good is going to reveal something about the distinction between reality and appearance. Okay, so keep this in mind as we I'm just going to read this quotation here at the beginning of Book 2. This is just a few lines down from the beginning. "Well then, you certainly are not doing what you want, right? Tell me, do you think there is a sort of good we would choose to have, not because we desire its consequences, but because we welcome it for its own sake, enjoying, for example, and all the harmless pleasures from which nothing results afterward beyond enjoying having them. And Socrates says, certainly there is such a thing, right? So there's a type of good which is just purely intrinsically valuable, not because it can get you something, but just because of it is what it is, right? It being what it is what makes it valuable. Okay, so we're going to talk about intrinsic value or intrinsic goodness here in a second. The second sort of good, Glaucon describes as this. There is a sort of good we love for its own sake and also for the sake of its consequences. Knowing or knowledge, for example, and seeing and being healthy. For we welcome such things, I imagine, on both counts. Socrates says yes. Okay, so the second one is things which are valued both because they're intrinsically good and because they have good consequences. So seeing, right? You might put it in these terms. We want to see, we desire to see just because there's something fulfilling, something interesting about just the desire to know, the desire to see what's there, right? If someone said, there's something in this box, it's almost human nature just to be inquisitive, to want to pop it open and see what's in there. Whether it's good or bad, what you do with it, whether you can do anything with it, it seems like there's something just innately desirable about seeing. But there's also good consequences that come from seeing, and that's partly why we want to see, right? You realize that once you see something, it becomes useful, right? You can do something with it. So there's a dual goodness to seeing, and the same thing goes for knowing, right? We want to know for its own sake. It's just sort of, the curiosity of the human being. We're just kind of inquisitive that we want to figure things out. What we do with it is maybe a later issue, a later question that we ask. But initially, it turns out that we just kind of want to figure stuff out just to figure it out. You want to know how something works, maybe not so that you can most efficiently move water up a hill or most efficiently dig a hole in the ground, but you want to figure out stuff just to figure it out. And then later down the road, you can ask, okay, we can now use this in various ways, and that's a secondary question, right? But there seems to be a distinction between the intrinsic goodness of seeing and knowing and the extrinsic goodness of seeing and knowing. The first is sort of independent of consequences. The second is dependent on the consequences of the thing. Okay, and then the third sort of good, Glaucon describes thus. He says, do you also recognize a third kind of good, which includes physical training, medical treatment when sick, both medicine itself and other ways of making money? So money is going to be central to this kind. He goes on to talk about wages, right? Money. Think about money. It's valuable. It's good. It has a value, but its goodness consists in only what you do with it, right? There's a type of value, but it serves no purpose if it doesn't do something, right? Having money can do lots of things. It can be used in exchange for other stuff. It could be physical stuff, like you could use this money to get food. You can use this money to get housing or clothing or whatnot, right? So the money can get you stuff. Maybe even the money. This get kind of circular, but the money could be used to get you more money. But ultimately, the only reason having more money would be valuable is if it ultimately was able to get you something other than money that was itself valuable, be it food or clothing or pleasure, right? You could use money to get you pleasure. Maybe that comes through food. It could also be the case that money can get you reputation. right? You get a good reputation if you have a lot of money. You seemingly get friends. Maybe they're not real friends, but they're at least acquaintances, people that want to be around you if you have money. So it has a value, but its value is always in terms of its consequences. Okay, so it's kind of intrinsically money is almost empty in a way. Doesn't mean it's bad or pointless. It just means you would be making a grave mistake if you identified money as what matters most to you, because it, by its very definition, finds its value in something other than itself. Okay, so that's very important to keep in mind. Okay, and so then what happens after you get this discussion of these three kinds of good? We'll call the first just purely intrinsic. The second is sort of a dual good. It's intrinsic and it's extrinsic. These are wedded together. The intrinsic and the extrinsic are merged. They're united so that you can't really separate the two, even though there are two aspects to it. And the third is that it's purely extrinsic. It's only valuable for its extrinsic consequences. Okay, and so then what happens is Glaucon says, where, Socrates, do you place justice? Is justice in the first, the second, or the third category? And Socrates says, well, it's in the finest one, the best one, which interestingly he identifies as that middle one, the one that is valuable both for its intrinsic value, its intrinsic goodness, and also for its extrinsic or consequential goodness, the effects, right? So justice is good because of its intrinsic nature. It's also good because of its extrinsic consequences. Okay. And then Glaucon says, but that's not what the masses think, right? So the masses, the many, the multitude, is a significant concept throughout the Republic, right? Because once again, the Republic is a dialogue about the unity of the many into a one, about the uniting of the many citizens into a single society, the uniting of the many different parts of the human life into a single human life. So the masses, according to Socrates, are in disagreement about this. They actually think that justice, as he goes on to say, is burdensome, right? Justice is a type of burden. Most people find the requirement to be just, the requirement to be moral, honest, truthful, that is burdensome. And so the way he puts this is as follows. This is the very bottom of page 36, 358a. On the contrary, they, the many, think it is a burden of the burdensome kind, the one that must be practiced for the sake of the wages and the popularity that come from a good reputation, and that is to be avoided just because of itself. But that is to be avoided just because of itself. So justice is valued only because of, say, the wages and the popularity that it generates. Okay, so this is the general view, right? We'll call this the general view, or the view of the masses. And what Glaucon is going to say, or going to try to argue, is that everyone, the masses, so to speak, they're right about this. That everyone, deep down, when you were to get them alone, so that they didn't have to be ashamed to admit what they really think, everyone deep down would say that they would prefer to be unjust rather than just. That it's easier, it's sort of more fulfilling as a human being to be unjust rather than to be just. And so Glaucon says that he's going to do three things in this book, in this conversation. So book 2, Glaucon's going to make 3 points, 3 arguments. And so these are listed on 358c. He says, so I will renew the argument of Thrasymachus. So he's bringing back up, reintroducing the argument of Thrasymachus, making that old argument new. And there's going to be a new force now to the argument. It didn't seem to be that forceful to Socrates before, but now when Glaucon reintroduces it, it's going to have a new force. Okay. So the first thing he's going to say is this. First, I will state what sort of thing people consider justice to be and what its origins are. So the first task of Glaucon is going to be to give a genealogy of justice, which this is very closely related to the project that Nietzsche is engaged in his on the genealogy of morals. He's going to try to give an account, a story about where and how justice came about. Not so much a defense or an appraisal or an evaluation of it. It's just an attempt to say, here's why there is such a thing as justice. Here's how justice came about as a concept in the lives of humans. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing Glaucon is going to argue is, and he says this just in the next sentence, I will argue that all who practice it, that is justice, do so unwillingly, as something compulsory, not as something good. So those that are just, according to Glaucon, are only just out of some sort of compulsion. They feel compelled. It's almost as if to be just is to not be free. You're only just if you're a type of slave. Once again, hearkening back to, or maybe not hearkening back, but hearkening forward to Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals, there's a type of slavery at the heart of morality. And this is something that Glaucon is going to say, this is what the many think, even if they don't elaborate on it in this sophisticated of a manner. This is deep down kind of what they implicitly believe about justice, is that you only do it out of some sort of unwilling compulsion because you have to within certain contexts. Okay, so the second thing is that, once again, we only practice justice unwillingly or unfreely or out of compulsion, not because it's actually something good. Okay, and the third thing that Glaucon's going to argue is, as he says, I will argue that they have good reason to act as they do. For the life of the unjust person is, they say, much better than that of the just one. Okay, so this is going once again back to Thrasymachus, who says injustice is more profitable, it's more advantageous than justice. So Glaucon's going to reintroduce that argument to try to say, let's slow down and let's really think about whether we would actually prefer justice over injustice in all contexts. And what Glaucon's going to do, which we'll get to here in a second, is he's going to introduce certain contexts where Glaucon hopes we come to think, no, actually, I would prefer to be unjust in that situation rather than just. Now, a similar type of method occurs when people are debating whether lying is something we should do or we should never do, right? Is it permissible or is it always impermissible? And what might happen is people might come up with a situation that's a pretty thick, difficult, sticky situation, and they're going to try to say, okay, in that situation, what would you deep down really, 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 you as an individual, not according to some like abstract theory, but you individual, when you really think about what you desire, what would you really want to happen. Would you really want to lie in that situation, or would you not? Right? I mean, the thing is like you could give situations of people who would lose their spouse and their children unless they tell a lie. You can fill in the details however you want, make it more persuasive the more details you fill in. And you kind of feel as you do this that you would never want to be in that situation, but deep down you kind of, according to Glaucon, you would kind of find yourself, no, I wish that I could lie in that situation. I actually think lying in that situation would be better in one very important sense than not lying. Even though you might have a theory, an ethical theory that says don't lie, when the rubber hits the road in this particular situation, sort of in private to yourself, you would rather lie than not, right? And so he wants to say that it actually is the case that we find injustice, or the life of injustice, more fulfilling. It's a better life than that of a just one when you evaluate justice and injustice intrinsically. Okay, so this is the thing that's going to happen. That you appraise justice and injustice for their goodness, and as I've already said, there's two senses in which that could be. It could be extrinsically. You could talk about all the good consequences of justice, or you could talk about the intrinsic nature of justice. And what Glaucon's going to say is everyone knows the extrinsic consequences of being just. You get a good reputation. Everyone pats you on the back for being, such a good human being, and you as an individual feel all puffed up, like, wow, I am a kind of a holy person. I do all the right things. Isn't this life great? This life of, being an ethical person. Everyone respects me. Everyone thinks I'm a wonderful person. I think of myself as a wonderful person. And you have this reputation associated with that, which might open the doors for, getting jobs and for all these other consequences. What Glaucon's going to go on, what he's going to argue down the road, not too far down the road, just about 2 pages later, he's going to say, but all of those consequences, they call it the reputation of justice, that can all come about even if you are unjust, because you can fool people about how you act. If you've ever, read anything in the newspaper over the last, 20, 50, 100 years, you've read stories about people that seemed in the eyes of the public to be bright shining stars of virtue and excellence, and then the next day you read the stories about how horrible of a person they are, all the horrendous, horrible things that they've done. What has happened is they have been, it's not like overnight their character changed. It's just that for many, many, many years, they were reaping the benefits of a just life when they weren't actually living a just life. And so what Glaucon's saying is it's possible for that to happen. And the better you are at being unjust, the more likely it is that you can endure that, and therefore you'll never get caught. And so some people aren't good at being unjust and they get caught. But the better you are at being unjust, the longer you can reap the benefits of justice. And so you can kind of be seen as a just person, even though you are not actually one. And so you don't want to praise or evaluate justice simply through the extrinsic value, because the extrinsic value, according to Glaucon, can be something had through some other type of life, namely the unjust life. So the consequences are there are things that could be caused by many different causes, or could come about by many different causes. It could come about through justice, or it could come about through injustice. Okay, and so what we're going to really then focus on is not what are the extrinsic values or the extrinsic goods of justice, but what's the intrinsic good of justice. Okay, so that's going to be the heart of Book 2 is the intrinsic nature of justice. Where does its value lie? But we're not going to so much get an answer to that question, but we're going to get the proposal of the challenge, the proposal of the question. And the force that you get in Book 2 for that challenge is tremendous. So we're gonna start to work through that. But let's begin with the first task that Glaucon raises, which is, where does justice come from? How does it come about in society? The concept of justice originates somewhere, somehow. How does it do so? Good question. Here's what he says. He gives a type of story. This is 358E, right? Okay. Once again, I'll just read a bit of this. So this is Glaucon speaking. Now listen to what I said I was going to discuss first. What justice is like and what its origins are. Right. So this is what he's doing. He's going to say what justice is like and what its origins are. People say, you see, that to do injustice is naturally good and to suffer injustice bad. So to do whatever you want and to get away with it is what we want. To suffer injustice, meaning to suffer things we don't want to happen to us, is bad, right? So you don't want someone to take your backpack, and they do. That's an injustice. You don't want to get sick, and you do. That's an injustice, right? So to suffer injustice is to sort of suffer the things that you don't want to happen to you. To do injustice is to do the things that you want to do, and not be thwarted, right? Not be constrained from that. Okay, and so the most people think if you have complete free reign and you can accomplish whatever your heart's desires, then that's good. If you can't, that's bad. Okay, he goes on. Hence, those who have done and suffered injustice and who have tasted both, right? So if you've done injustice and you've suffered it, you know what that's like, right? He goes on. The ones who lack the power to do it and to avoid suffering it decide that it is profitable to come to an agreement with each other, neither to do injustice nor to suffer it. As a result, they begin to make laws and covenants, and what the law commands they call lawful and just. That, they say, is the origin and very being of justice. So the essence of justice, the origin, the nature of justice, consists in this agreement between people who are unjust, right? So you might conceive of this genealogy as ultimately rooted in people who it's kind of like a state of nature where these people are warring against each other. I'm trying to take the things that I want. I'm trying to do the things that I want, and that's going to sort of screw you over, but you're doing the things that you want, and that's kind of screwing me over. And so we're kind of like in this like battle between I'm trying to fulfill my wishes and desires, and you're trying to fulfill your wishes and desires. And we realize that this is just not a happy, good way of living. Even though like I wish I could live this way and overpower you, and you wish you could live the way you want to, and thereby overpower me, but we come to this understanding that neither of us are going to be able to win, and so it would be better if we come to some sort of agreement or some contract whereby we kind of compromise. And I say, okay, well, I won't steal your apples if you don't steal my apples, and I won't stab you in the back if you don't stab me in the back. And so we say, but I wish I could steal your apples, and I wish I could stab you in the back, but all things considered, it's a better way of living, just compromising and not, getting our way that we wish we could have and kind of settle on a happy medium, which neither of us really, really want. But in the grand scheme of things, we realize it's sort of the best, all things considered. And so the way it's put by Glaucon in the next sentence, it is in between the best and the worst. The best is to do injustice without paying the penalty, right? So that's what we really wish we could do. The worst is to suffer it without being able to take revenge. That's like the worst that could happen to us, is that someone offends us or does an injustice to us that we can't, take action on or get revenge for. It's sort of in between those two states that we realize it's probably the best way to live, all things considered. And so justice, as Glaucon says, is in the middle between these two extremes. People love it, not because it is a good thing, but because they are too weak to do injustice with impunity. Right? But he says, but someone who has the power to do it, however, that is, someone who is truly a man, or in Nietzsche's phrase, an overman, an Übermensch, would not make an agreement with anyone, neither to do injustice nor to suffer it. Right? So if you had the power to do whatever you wanted to do, justice would serve no purpose for you. Right? Justice only has a purpose if you realize you're too weak to get what you really want to get. And you're afraid that bad things might happen to you if you do try to get that. And so you kind of come to this compromise, and that's where, the origin, as he puts it, of justice comes from. The essence of justice lies in that contract. And this is a very, very, very early version of what's known as the social contract theory, which is a very common kind of modern ethical theory that ethics, politics is rooted in the contracts that are made by consenting adults or consenting citizens. Those that consent to these contracts, which are these do's and don'ts, all for the sake of this commonly agreed upon common good. But it's all rooted in, and this is what's really important to this genealogy, or this history of justice. It's all rooted in the fact that the origin of justice is actually our desire to be unjust, right? So that's very important. It's not first and foremost that humans are in essence good-natured, good sort of good desires justice. Rather, it's the fact that humans more fundamentally, more basically, more essentially desire injustice, but we can't get it, right? We're too weak to have all of our wild dreams come true, and so we have to sort of rein it in and kind of temper it with these limiting contracts, these limiting laws, which we call justice. Okay, so that's the origin of justice. And he gives an example that shows, he thinks, why people are just unwillingly or by compulsion. And the way he does this is pretty fascinating. What he does is he gives this story about this this shepherd who comes across this ring, which makes him invisible, and it's pretty reminiscent of The Hobbit. You might be thinking Bilbo Baggins here, but the idea is you have this person who's living a just life. They're following the rules. They're doing all the do's and not doing all the don'ts, and they come across this ring, which is this ring of great power because it makes them invisible. And so now they can spy, and, we don't have to get into the details of how this gives them power, but the way the story is told is that this ring is supposed to indicate an increase in unlimited power. They can do whatever they want and not get caught. It's supposed to be what this ring symbolizes. They can do what they want and not have to suffer the consequences, the external consequences. And so what Plato does at this point of the dialogue is he proposes, so what would happen to this lowly shepherd who was given this ring, right? What would happen to them? What would become of their life? Their life seemed pretty good. I mean, they were, pretty walking the straight and narrow. And now when they come across this ring, what happens is that they find themselves not just tempted by injustice, but actually doing injustice or living an unjust life. And so they go on and they persuade the queen of the area to, they murder the king, and they persuade the queen, and eventually he becomes the ruler, which is supposed to symbolize that he now becomes a tyrant. So when you're given unlimited power, which is sort of what everyone wants, unlimited freedom to do whatever your heart desires, most people are going to want to become tyrants, right? They're going to want to become just the rule makers, not the rule followers. And he thinks this is just built into human nature. And so if that is human nature, that we desire to become tyrants, it's just that most of us would make really bad tyrants because most of us are pretty weak. It's kind of like, it's like the guy that's thinking, only if I had, more muscles, only if I was faster and I had better looks, and then I would be, like the awesome kid in school, right? And I could beat this person up, and I can steal this kid's lunch money and all that. And what happens is that person just doesn't have those traits. He doesn't have that strength. He doesn't have that type of gumption, that personality, and so he's just sort of too weak to execute what he really wishes. And so it's just sort of this fantasy pipe dream for him that he realizes he should probably just not act on any of that, because if he tried, he would just get completely pulverized and destroyed if he attempted to live that out. But if he were given that power, if he were actually made that strong and that good looking and that whatever, then you realize, that would be the way his life would actually go. And so the way that Socrates describes it is, Glaucon in this situation describes it is, the only thing that's keeping people just is their own weakness. The only thing that makes you follow laws is that you realize that in this situation, it is better not to get caught. It's better not to suffer the consequences of failure, even though it's sort of, unfortunate that I have to do X, Y, and Z. I wish I didn't have to do this, but in the grand scheme of things, it's probably better, because if I didn't do this, I would be sort of too weak to hold my own, right? And so that's the story, right? Of why we do this out of compulsion. And if you can kind of think about it in terms of why. I mean, this is sort of getting more personal. So just for yourself, think about why do you think it is bad to tell a lie? Why do you think it is bad to cheat on tests? Maybe you don't think it's bad to cheat on tests, but why do you think most people think that, right? Why is it the case that most people think it's bad to cheat on tests? Right, and it's like, also, why is it, you could put this on a spectrum with, why is it bad to speed, to break the speed limit? What's the reason for the speed limit? Why do you abide by the speed limit? Or whenever you don't abide by the speed limit, why not? In many cases, we think, well, this is a very, secluded back road. The chances that there are any, police patrols on this road is probably very minimal. So I'll just speed for a little bit because I know the chances of getting caught are pretty low. The consequences of speeding are probably pretty low. And so you realize the likelihood of suffering the consequences for breaking the law are so low that you think you could probably get away. You have the power, you have the ability to do what you really want now. Nothing is going to be holding you back. The fear of getting caught is almost out the window if you're driving down these back country roads, and so you kind of think it's not that big of a deal. And so that, I think, is what Glaucon is saying is at the heart of all human beings, that we naturally desire injustice over justice, and justice comes about only because of the fact that in most situations we're too weak to actually get what we want. Okay, so I mean, it's worth, just for your own sake, thinking about why you do follow the laws, why you do follow various ethical codes, the Ten Commandments, the Beatitudes. In some, this pushes us a little bit later into the next part of the dialogue, where Adeimantus comes in, and he starts addressing this pretty fascinating issue about the consequences of living a just life and the consequences of living an unjust life. And it could turn out that the person who lives the just life might reap the benefits of justice, but it could also turn out that, and this is something that we have seen before, the person who is just, the person who's honest, the person who is upright, who follows the laws, follows the rules, that person is the person who can be seen to be unjust. Right? They can be slandered, so that even though they're actually just, in the eyes of the many, they're seen as liars and cheaters. Right? The person who actually lives the just life will be presented, or could be presented, as an unjust person. And so once you strip away all of the extrinsic goods of justice, reputation and friends and all that, once all that's stripped away, you now have to ask the question, where does the value of justice lie? Would anyone actually want to live a just life if everyone in the world thought that they were unjust? Right. So that's something worth thinking about, considering that the motivation for justice for many of us, myself included, I think, is extrinsic, and it's really difficult to see where the intrinsic value comes from. Right? Why do you desire to follow the rules? Why do you desire to follow morality? What Glaucon is trying to propose, remember, he's trying to propose this so that we can better understand the right answer, not because he actually thinks this. He wants to try to understand the real intrinsic value of justice, and so he does this by challenging it. And so what you have is the valuation will have to kind of move beyond the extrinsic goods, both reputation and money and praise and all that. But even what Adeimantus goes on to say is even the rewards from the divinities, right? So this is a pagan society where what you have is you have these divinities, and you might do various actions because they're pleasing to the gods. It makes the gods happy. If you don't do those actions, it makes the gods sad, and they'll punish you for it. And so the justice or the morality of an action, if it's thought of in that type of way, is still only an extrinsic good, right? Oh, I only tell the truth because I don't want the gods to be mad at me. I only care about not murdering because I don't want the gods to punish me. That is, in essence, at the very heart of it, no different from saying, oh, I only want to be just so that I can have a good reputation. I only want to be just so that I can have good rewards, right? It's just in this case, the rewards are eternal rewards. The rewards are eternal, divine reputation. But it's still just, justice as a means to an end. Justice as a type of extrinsic good. And I think it's easy for the Christian to think about justice or morality in those terms, which is, radically like kind of consequentialist terms, where what matters, what's valuable in justice is the consequences. It just turns out that the consequences aren't earthly; they're heavenly, and so that seems to make it a little more dignified. That I don't cheat on my test because it breaks the divine law, it breaks the divine commands, and I don't want to suffer the punishments of that. But that's still, on the same plane as the desire to be just only because you're afraid of suffering earthly punishments. It just turns out it's a different type of punishment or a different type of reward. But the nature of justice is sort of the same, because it's still an evaluation in terms of extrinsic goods. Something other than justice makes this valuable. And this can also be, I think, framed in terms of love or charity, right? So this is especially unique for Christianity, right? So what's the value in loving? What's the value in loving your neighbor? Hopefully, the sole reason in loving your neighbor isn't so I can get to heaven. Because if that's the case, then it seems like all that's happening is your neighbor becomes this like stepping stone that you step on so that you can elevate yourself up higher. It becomes this means to an end, and therefore it actually like ceases to be real love once it's seen as something that is self-serving. That if the justification or the reason for loving is so that I can gain, then it's not love. It's only like a simulacra of love. It's only a false love. And that type of thing, I think, is also going on here in Book 2 within the context of justice. It's not love, but it's justice. And it turns out that what we're looking for is not a different type of extrinsic value, which you would get by appealing to the gods. What you're looking for is an intrinsic value. So regardless of whether or not you're going to suffer eternal punishment for this, regardless of whether or not you're going to, reap an eternal reward for this, is there something internally valuable about it? And that's the question that is on the table. So you don't want to say, oh, we should be moral because we'll get to heaven. Even if that's true, that kind of misses the question on the table. The question on the table is, yeah, but is there any internal intrinsic value, regardless of whether or not you're going to get to heaven if you do the right things? Okay, so the attempt to evaluate the intrinsic nature of justice is what we're after. Okay, and what you have with Glaucon and Adeimantus is they present these two lives: the just person who looks perfectly, horrendous. They look like a scoundrel. They look like an unjust person on the one hand, but they're actually, in essence, they're perfectly just. You could think of, I don't know, someone like Jesus, who everyone from the outside thought was this great heretic. They thought he was this great blasphemer. They thought he was this person who was this, great deviation from the law. But it turns out that in essence, he was actually the fulfillment of the law. He was the perfection of justice. But from the outside, he looked like he was the destroyer of the law. Okay, so that's on the one hand. And you can have someone on the other hand who looks perfect, looks pristine. This is like, the popularity figure, the figure that everyone, is liking and subscribing to, the person who says all the right things. They seem so right, so perfect. How could they ever go astray? You think, I just wish I could be that person. I wish I could live that person's life because they seem so good. They seem to have all their stuff together. But in essence, they're like the most despicable, disgusting person that has lived. It's just that they're an incredible genius at hiding that fact from not making that known. And so they can reap all the benefits of goodness without actually being good. They can reap all the benefits of justice without being just. And so those are possibilities. And so what Glaucon and Adeimantus are saying is, so do you really think you would prefer the first person? Like, would you rather live that first type of life or the second type of life? Do you really, really, really think that? And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get Socrates to realize that most people would choose the second life. So help us to see why that second type of life is better, why that second type of life is worse than that first type of life. Why is it better to be just intrinsically versus unjust? And that's a big challenge. And the way that comes about is through this discussion, the transition in this discussion on page 46. This is around 368 D, somewhere around there. It comes about through this really beautiful movement between the individual and the communal, the small and the big, the microscopic and the macroscopic. And what Socrates is going to do is he's going to try to show what justice is for an individual by looking at it in a larger scale, as he puts it, or a larger size. And so he says, I'll show you what justice is and why justice is valuable, but I have to do that by looking at it in a place that we can see better. And so then he appeals to politics. So politics, it becomes the macrocosm of the individual human life. And so one way to think of the whole discussion and the importance of politics is that it helps us understand ourselves better. The discussion of political justice and what makes for a just society helps us to understand what makes for a just individual life, because as we're going to see, there's a relationship of imaging or an icons. You could think of the society as an icon of the individual soul, and you even get this, as I've already made reference to, I believe in an earlier podcast, that the notion of the icon of the individual presenting or showing the the reality of the individual, so that the communal becomes like a person itself, right? And so we refer to this in Scripture. St. Paul does in as the body of Christ. There's a single body, a single life, with one head, many different members, many different parts, but there's only one body. That idea is very close to what's happening in Plato's Republic, that you have all these different members coming together to form a single life. And so what Socrates is going to try to do is he's going to try to show us what justice is, and why it's intrinsically valuable. Like, that is why the value of justice is not found outside of itself, but within itself. But the way he does that is through a discussion of politics, because he thinks those are concepts that are easier for us to understand and to comprehend. And so he's going to help us to see that and this is, I think, is also an important lesson to just carry on in your own kind of thinking about politics and pretty much just about the world and creation as a whole, is that there's a resemblance or an imaging going on. You could think of the Son as an image of the Father. Creation is an image of God. The community is an image of the individual. Right. So this is a way in which we could talk about all these things. To exist is to be in the image and likeness of something else, or it is to be the image and likeness of something else. And so I think that what you have at this point in the Republic is this attempt to understand the self by looking at community, because what justice is it's a communal term. It's a communal virtue. Just as we saw last time, justice is the virtue of ruling, and so it's about communing the many, about making the many into a one. And so the internal value of justice is going to have to be found in the concept of communing, or to make many one. It's not like, once you make many one, there's some good that you can now get out of that. That's not going to be the case. It's going to be, as he's going to try to argue, found precisely in when the many are made one. That's where the goodness lies. The intrinsic goodness lies once the many are made one. It's not like that brings about some secondary effect. Okay, so what we're going to do next time is we're going to turn to look at that discussion of the city as a macrocosm of the individual, or an individual as a microcosm of the city, and that's going to lead us to the end of Book 2.